Going to be saying queer a lot in this video, but like in a cool we reclaim this kind of way. But if that still makes you upset, this is your time to click off the video. This video is also going to be talking about things like discrimination, trans panic murders, hate speech and hate crimes against people of color and LGBTQ+ individuals, and other such topics. So again, if that kind of stuff is triggering for you or just makes you upset, this is your warning. But without further ado, let's just start talking about it.
The Motion Picture Production Code, widely known as the Hays Code from the early 1930s to late 1960s, were a set of rules for what filmmakers were and weren't allowed to show.
Of course, this is a very extensive list, but their general principles were as follows. 1. No picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who will see it. Hence, the sympathy of the audience should never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. 2. Correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be presented. Essentially, it meant don't glorify unhealthy living or life standards unless it was to show how far a character had fallen. Law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation. Pretty self-explanatory. Don't go breaking laws and acting like it's a good thing. Now, these rules have since been abolished in favor of letting filmmakers explore more complicated topics, but they go to show the ideology of audiences and especially producers of the time, namely, keep it as traditional and family-friendly as possible. Enter the X-Men. I know, just stick with me for a second. I promise this is going somewhere. In case you've been living under a rock since the 1970s, the X-Men are a superhero group created by writer/editor Stan Lee and artist/co-writer Jack Kirby of Marvel Comics. Their adventures consisted of normal superhero stuff. Fighting giant robots, battling their morally gray nemesis, going to protest to stand up for their rights to exist and overthrowing fascist governments, fighting the giant robots again. From their creation, the X-Men were nothing like other superhero groups at the time. They fell under a wider umbrella of Marvel characters known as mutants, describing any character who had the fictional genetic mutation known as the X gene. This X gene could grant the person almost any power, from heightened regeneration and sense of smell, to opening literal portals to hell. The 70s, am I right? However, the point of the X-Men wasn't to explore what realistic powers through genetic mutation would look like, boy, it definitely wasn't that, but rather to explore what discrimination against marginalized groups would look like through the lens of a superhero comic. For generations, superheroes have been a pillar of representation for the little guy. With underdog stories like Captain America and Spider-Man, to stories of the indomitable human spirit like the Fantastic Four and their goal to discover the stars. It's no wonder people tend to see themselves in these characters. Why wouldn't you want to? To know that these larger-than-life characters were just like you, they struggled the same as you. To know that through hard work and determination you could be just like them. I mean, the whole inspiration for Miles Morales in the Spider-Verse, an event in comics where we saw multiple different versions of our friendly neighborhood webhead, was that anybody can wear the mask. The X-Men were no different. They were created for people who felt like outcasts, or like they were just too different from society. They were a sort of found family, a group of heroic outlaws and vigilantes, a group of mutated superheroes harboring a dark secret from society lest they face judgment, while being the very ones to protect it. Time and time again, mutants as a whole are targeted by some big bad villain or galactic threat that— wait, isn't that like all superheroes? Did I say galactic threat? I meant the government and their various branches specifically created to hunt down mutants and either wipe them out or cure them, like some sort of ethno-cleanse. Let me put something in context for you. During the 80s, America was struck with an epidemic of the AIDS virus. From 1981 to 1989, over 100,000 people died because of it, and naturally, with death on that large of a scale, people were upset. Activists and civilians alike criticized the government for their failed response to this epidemic, the New York Times even reluctant to put out a story relating to the subject. During and after the most rapid spikes in AIDS cases, Marvel released the Legacy Virus arc of comics, which followed the X-Men battling against an artificial disease that was slowly killing off all mutants on Earth and would soon do the same to other non-mutants. Now, there was a lot going on with the X-Men at the time, with this whole Civil War thing, but we're just going to be focusing on the plot centered around the virus for this video. It was a disease that was transmitted through contact, was believed only to affect mutants, a very specific group of society, and was created by an incredibly rich supervillain to completely wipe out the X-Men for good. So, needless to say, there were
similarities.
But this isn't the only example of mutants in Marvel being a mirror for marginalized groups in real life. Several times there are mass mutant extinction events, which see an attempt at curing mutants of this X gene in an attempt to save them. Proposition X was even a law that the government passed for a short time in Marvel canon, which banned mutants from procreating or marrying any non-mutant. Subtlety. And, although it was executed very poorly and received lots of backlash from the community, in Uncanny X-Men number 17, a canonically trans mutant is killed in an alleyway after some thugs find out about her mutant status and take her life. This particular scene received lots of backlash due to it being so sudden and graphic. It didn't really add any substance to the story. It felt less like a representation of a violent crime and more like pandering. Not to mention, the character in question, Wolfsbane, was fairly strong in her own right. She was more than capable of taking on 3 regular humans. However, there are plenty of positive, if not kind of funny, parallels. By the way, please try to ignore that it's darker now. I, despite being so smart and sexy, cannot control the sun. In X-Men The Last Stand, released 2006, Iceman, or Bobby Drake, even comes out as a mutant to his parents, to which his mother responds, and I quote,
"Have you tried not being a mutant?"
One of the key messages of the X-Men and mutants as a whole really being, anybody can be a mutant. Sometimes it's really obvious and sometimes it isn't, but ultimately they're just like any of us, and they deal with their own struggles from day to day. Mutants or not, they're people. And as someone who's read comics like these since she was a little kid and have since discovered a lot about my own identity, I think it's important that problems like these reach as many people as possible to raise awareness, even if it's in a way you might not expect. It's also really empowering to see content like this be spread around, and to know that it's always been around. You just have to know where to look. It may or may not surprise you to learn that ancient Greece, with all of its fantastical mythology, fabulous poems, and various inventions, was fairly accepting of queer culture. Ovid's Metamorphoses is an anthology series of poems that chronicles various changes of a person's or thing's form, whether metaphorical or literal. A select few of these stories even include a character going through a sex change through sex reassignment surgery. Now, this was hundreds and hundreds of years ago, so information wasn't as widely spread, and medical procedures weren't as developed. But you can clearly see that the concept is there. Ovid even explores people living outside the gender binary and leading perfectly happy lives in their new flesh. Again, whether literally or through metaphor depends on the story. And this was not a one-time thing. You could even argue that the famous Greek gods were a hodgepodge of queer identities. Gods regularly hooked up with mortals, or even other gods of the same sex. They were famously known for shapeshifting into animals or a more humanly form, which occasionally was of the opposite sex. In one such story, Zeus and Aphrodite even got into an argument about procreating, and changed their form to that of the other sex to see if the other was right. But the biggest example of a Greek god exploring something other than heteronormative love was the goddess Artemis. Artemis is the Greek goddess of the hunt, transitions, wilderness, wild animals, childbirth, and chastity. Technically, she was also called Phoebe, Diana, or even Cynthia, depending on who you're asking, but mythological nomenclature is a whole can of worms we really don't have the time for. Anyways, back on track. Although many gods have experimented in breaking the boundaries of their society's concept of love, Artemis is arguably the most repeated instance of this topic. She has regularly had womanly lovers, and even swore that she would never belong to a man and give her hand away in marriage. She made this oath after accidentally killing the one man she had ever loved, and eloped shortly after with a mortal woman into the woods, where I'm sure they lived happily ever after. Whoops! Yeah, these writers could never really agree on an ending, and they were rarely happy if they did. Again, depending on who you ask, Artemis was never this independent, don't need no man, confident lesbian, but a symbol of asexuality and love without sexual pleasure. Look no further than the never giving her hand away in marriage line. But again, trying to piece together a proper timeline or fit together the frankly fractured history of Greco-Roman mythology is like trying to find a needle in the haystack. Except the haystack is the size of your house, and every piece of hay is painted to look like a needle. Oh, also, people just keep adding stuff to the hay pile without you asking, and overall, it's pretty clear to see that queer people have and always will be around. It's imperative that we continue to tell these stories and create our own, because storytelling itself is a powerful thing. Ancient Greece is, well, ancient Yet it's arguably still the most influential piece of history we have when it comes to how we think about philosophy and stories as a whole. Culture survives through the stories it tells and its ability to inspire others to keep creating. As we tell these stories, it leads to this telephone effect, whereas each person hears a story and goes on to tell it to the next person, they add their own little details for the next to pass on. To exist is to change, and that's why the documentation of these epics and the representation of marginalized groups is so important. It shows that we were here, and it tells a story that feels so real because it is. Unfortunately, I do think that's all the time we have for today, but I want to say, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about old fictional gay people. I'm glad I get to share my view through my own weird, nerdy lens and hopefully shed some light on the nature of queer representation in media. Maybe I even got some of you to do your own research. So remember, please subscribe or I will cry. Okay, bye.